He did not write to his family, nor did he receive letters from home. But once a week, business associates of Aldovrandi made the trip over the Futa Pass to Florence. They took news of Michelangelo to the Buonarroti and brought it back in turn. A week after Michelangelo had fled, Charles VIII had entered the city with his lance leveled to indicate that he was a conqueror. Though no shots had been fired, he was welcomed through streets draped with tapestries and awnings and oil lamps. The Ponte Vecchio had been festively decorated. He was graciously received by the Signoria for prayers in the Duomo. He was given the Medici Palace as his headquarters. But when it came to the peace treaty, Charles had acted haughtily, threatened to recall Piero, demanded an emperor's ransom. Fighting had broken out in the streets. French soldiers and Florentines had attacked each other. The Florentines had shut down their city and prepared to evict the French. Charles grew. Charles grew more reasonable, settled for 120,000 florins the right to maintain 2 fortresses in Florence until his war with Naples was over, and took his army out of Florence. The city was proud of having faced up to the leader of 20,000 armed soldiers, of having replied, when he threatened, "We shall sound our trumpets with, and we shall ring our bells." Yet the wheels of the city-state had creaked to a painful halt. Ruled for so long by the Medici, the governmental structure did not work without an executive. Former councillors had been Medici adherents who had developed a modus vivendi for working together. Now the city was torn by factions. One group wished to install the Venetian form of government. Another wanted the one council of the people to pass the laws and elect magistrates. A second council, smaller, of experienced men to establish domestic and international policy. Guidantonio Vespucci, spokesman for the wealthy nobles, called these measures dangerously democratic, fought to keep all power in a few hands. By mid-December, news reached Bologna that Savonarola had stepped into the crisis with a series of Haggai sermons in which he backed the proposed democratic structure. Visitors to the Aldovrandi Palace outlined the priest's concept of elected councils. Only real property was to be taxed. Every Florentine was to have a vote. All over 29 years of age who had paid their taxes were to be eligible to the Grand Council. By the end of the sermons, Vespucci and his nobles had been defeated. Savonarola's plan had been adopted. From Bologna, it appeared that Savonarola had become political as well as religious leader of Florence. His victory over Il Magnifico was complete. With the coming of the new year, Piero de' Medici returned to Bologna to set up headquarters. Coming home from his workshop, Michelangelo found a group of Piero's professional soldiers in the street before the Aldovrandi Palace. Piero was inside with Giuliano. Though Charles, when he made the peace with Florence, had insisted that the price on Piero's head and on Giuliano's be revoked, all Medici estates had been confiscated and Piero himself banished the 200 miles from the Tuscan border. When they met at the entrance to the dining room, Michelangelo exclaimed, "Excellency, how good to see you again, though I could wish it were at the Medici Palace." "We'll be back there soon enough," growled Piero. "The Signoria drove me out by force. I am assembling an army and shall drive them out by force." Giuliano now grew as tall as Michelangelo, had bowed formally to Michelangelo. But when Piero took Signora Aldovrandi out into dinner, the two young men hugged each other. There was little pleasure at the usually gay Aldovrandi table, for Piero immediately outlined his plan for the reconquest of Florence. All he required was sufficient money, hired mercenaries, weapons, horses. Piero expected Aldovrandi to contribute 2,000 florins to his campaign. "Excellency, are you sure this is the best way?" asked Aldovrandi respectfully. "When your great-grandfather Cosimo was exiled, he waited until the city found it needed him and called him back. Wait for that hour, Excellency." "I'm not as forgiving as my grandfather. Florence wants me back right now. It is just Savonarola and my cousins who have schemed against me." He turned to Michelangelo. "You shall enter my army as an engineer. Help design the wall fortifications after we have conquered the city." Michelangelo sat with his head bowed. "Would you wage war on Florence, Excellency?" he murmured after a moment. "I would, and I shall, as soon as I have a force strong enough to batter down the walls. But if the city were bombarded, it could be destroyed. What then? Florence is a pile of stones. If we knock them down, we will put them together again. But the art? What is art? We can replace all the paint and marble in a year, and it will be a Florence that I will command." No one touched a bite of food. Aldovrandi turned to Piero. "In the name of my friend Il Magnifico, I must decline. The money you ask for is yours, but not for purposes of war. Lorenzo would have been the first to stop you, were he alive." Piero turned to Michelangelo. "Are you Buonarroti?" "I, too, Excellency, must decline. I will serve you in any way you ask, but not to wage war against Florence." Piero pushed his chair back, rose to his feet. "The kind of people I inherited from my father, Poliziano and Pico, who preferred dying to fighting. You, Aldovrandi, who were my father's podesta of Florence, and you, Michelangelo, who had lived under our roof 4 years. What kind of men are you that you will not fight back?" He swept out of the room. Michelangelo said with tears in his eyes, "Forgive me, Giuliano." Giuliano had also risen, turned to leave the room. "I, too, shall refuse to wage war. That would only make Florence hate us the more. Arrivederci, Michelangelo. I shall write Contessino that I have seen you." He was still skittish about angels. He remembered the first one he had done for the Ghirlandaio fresco using the son of the carpenter downstairs of the Buonarroti house. The other apprentices had called him a fraud because he had cheated on the halo, making it fade into the background. What was an angel, male or female, human or divine? Prio Bisciolini had once called it a spiritual being attendant on God. His embarrassment as he drew hundreds of angels was the more acute after his months of dissection. Now that he knew the tissue and function of human anatomy, he could hardly refrain from using that knowledge. But did an angel have a 25-foot snake of bowel? He must also carve his angel fully clothed to match the one on the other at the end of the arc. With the angel and the 2 saints, he was right back where Ghirlandaio had told him he would stay all his life, able to portray hands, feet, perhaps a little of the neck and throat. For the rest, all his hard-earned knowledge would be hidden under flowing robes. For his spiritual being attendant on God, he chose a contadino boy from the war with his family to attend church, looking a little like Burgundine, with a wide, fleshy face, but the features cut square in the Greek tradition. He had well-developed arms and shoulders built by guiding a plow behind oxen. This powerful young male held high a candelabrum that would have required a giant to lift, instead of compensating with delicate, diaphanous wings. As he knew he ought, he rubbed salt into the wound of his own befuddlement by designing the 2 wings of an eagle, about to take off, coming all the way down the boy's back. These he carved out of wood to attach to his clay model wings so heavy that they would have floored the delicate Dell'Arca angel on the opposite side. He invited Aldovrandi to visit the workshed. Aldovrandi was not at all upset by the vigor of the model. "We Bolognese are not spiritual beings. Carve a lusty angel." And so he did, setting up the thickest of Aldovrandi's 3 Carrara blocks. He felt complete again, with the hammer and chisel in his hands, the dry caking marble dust in his nostrils, the white chips and powder covering his hair and clothes. When he worked stone, he was a man of substance. Now, he did not need the braziers, for he created his own warmth, moving the workbench out into the open courtyard when there was any winter sun to feel the space around him. In the evenings, after he had read aloud to Aldovrandi and illustrated a page of Dante, he would do his exploratory drawing for the Saint Petronius, patron saint of Bologna, convert to Christianity from a noble Roman family and builder of San Petronio. He used as his models the older guests in the Aldovrandi Palace, members of the 16 professors from the university, justices sketching their faces and figures in his mind while he sat with them at table, then retiring to room to hammer down on the paper the lines. Forms of interrelation of feature and expression that makes every human being different from another. There was little he could do with St. Petronius that could be original. The Dominicans of San Domenico and the Bolognese government officials were set on what they wanted. St. Petronius must be no less than 60. He must be fully gowned in luxuriant robes, an archbishop's crown on his head. He must hold in his arms a model of the city of Bologna with its towers and palaces piled high above its protecting walls. He acquired a neighbor in the stall opposite. It was Vincenzo, whose father had secured a contract for making new brick and tile for a cathedral repair job. A crew of mechanics came in to fill the stalls for the repairs, and the enclosed courtyard rang with the noise of materials being unloaded. Vincenzo afforded the workyard running entertainment by taunting Michelangelo throughout the workday. Our brick lasts for 1,000 years. It's harder than your Florentine stone. It's true that you make durable brick, Vincenzo. Don't patronize me, said Vincenzo. You Florentines think you are the only artists in Italy. Michelangelo blushed. Vincenzo cried to the workmen, Look at his face. I caught him out. When Vincenzo arrived with a wagon load of fresh tiles, he badgered Michelangelo with, I made 100 durable stones yesterday. What did you make? Charcoal scratches on a paper? Encouraged by the laughter of his townsmen, the brickmaker continued, That makes you a sculptor. Why don't you go home and leave Bologna to its natives? I intend to. When I have finished my 3 pieces, nothing can hurt my brick. Think how easy it's going to be for an accident to happen to one of your statues. The workmen stopped in their tasks. Silence filled the yard. Vincenzo, who made words much as he did brick, with shaping movements of his hands, continued with a crafty smile. Somebody brushes too close to the ark. Smasho! Your angel is in a dozen pieces. Michelangelo felt anger rise in his throat. You wouldn't dare. No, Buonarroti, not I. I am too graceful. But someone clumsy might stumble. The laughter of the workmen as they picked up their tools made him a little ill. The forces of the destruction, always one short step behind creation, he suffered through the days and weeks. St. Petronius emerged with a sad and deeply furrowed face. But there was inherent power in the body. The set of the head of the shoulders, the gripping strength of the feet, and the thin, soled sandals, the punishment stance of the knees, hips, shoulders, under the high robe, the arms in which he firmly held Bologna. This vigor he could convey as a craftsman. He knew he had done a good job. It was a creative artist that he felt he had contributed little. It is very little. It is very fine, said Aldovrandi when he saw the polished piece. Dell'Arca could not have surpassed it. But I am determined to give you something more, said Michelangelo doggedly. I must not leave Bologna without carving something exciting and original. Very well, you disciplined yourself to give you the St. Petronius we wanted. I will discipline Bologna to accept the proculus that you want. Bologna? The fat became Bologna the lean for him. He did not return home for the big midday dinner. When an Aldovrandi groom brought him hot food, he let it grow cold. It was not a moment when he wanted to stop. Now that spring was approaching, he was able to work longer each day, and frequently did not reach the Aldovrandi palace until after dark, dirty, sweaty, charcoal or chip-covered, ready to fall into a bed of exhaustion. But the Aldovrandi servants brought him a big wooden tub filled with hot water and laid out his clean clothes. He knew he was expected to join his patron in the library for a few hours of companionable talk. Clarissa he saw rarely, since he was attending few parties. But when he did see her, the delight and the torment racked him for nights, obliterating his sleep and permeating his mind for days. He tried to create the figure of St. Proculus, and drew instead Clarissa nude under her silks. He preferred not to see her. It was too painful. On the 1st of May, Aldovrandi told him he might not work. This was the happiest day in the year of Bologna, when the Countess of Love reigned. People gathered wild flowers in the country for their relatives and friends. Romantic young courtiers planted leafy trees with colored silk ribbons under the windows of their beloved, while their friends serenaded her. Michelangelo accompanied the Aldovrandi outside the main gate of town, where a platform had been erected, covered with damask and festoons of flowers. Here the Countess of Love was crowned, with all Bologna gathered to pay homage. Michelangelo, too, wanted to pay homage to love, or whatever it was that had been started boiling in his blood by the intoxicating air of the wild spring morning. The fragrance of the thousands of blossoms, the perfumes of the Bolognese women, beautiful on this ritual day, gowned in silks and jewels. But he did not see Clarissa. He saw Marco in the midst of his family, with 2 young maidens, apparently the family choices for marriage, hanging on either arm. He saw the older woman who had accompanied her on her shopping trips to the city, saw her maid and several other of the servants picnicking in the fields beyond the platform where the ceremonies took place. But no Clarissa, search as he might. And then he found he was no longer before the main platform or in the celebrating Bolognese crowds. His feet were carrying him swiftly up the road to Clarissa's villa. He did not know where he would go when he got there, what he would say, how he would explain when someone opened the gate to him. Trembling all over, he half ran up the foothill road. The front gate was unbolted. He went to the front door, pushed on the clapper, knocked again and again. Just as he was beginning to think that no one was at home, and that he had acted stupidly, the door was opened a crack. There stood Clarissa in a peignoir, her golden hair hanging loosely down her back, open to her knees, without cosmetics or jewels, smelling aseptically of soap. And her face, to Michelangelo, more beautiful, her whole body more desirable because it was unornamented. He stepped inside the door. There was no sound in the house. She threw the bolt. Then they were in a passionate embrace, their bodies merging, knee and crotch, breasts and chest, their mouths moist and sweet and glued and drinking deep, their arms with all the power of an unquenchable life force crushing each to the other in a total pulsating time and place and sense-annihilating embrace. She led him to her bedroom. She had nothing on beneath the robe. The slender body, the red-pointed breasts, the golden mount of Venus, whereas his draftsman's eye had known them all along, a female beauty made for love. It was like penetrating deep into white marble with the pounding life thrust of his chisel, beating upward through the warm, living marble with one go. His whole body behind the heavy hammer, penetrating through each ever deeper and deeper furrows of soft, yielding, living substance, until he had reached the explosive climax, and all of his fluid strength, love, passion, desire had been poured into the nascent form. And the marble block, made to love the hand of the true sculptor, had responded, giving of its inner heat and substance and fluid form, until at last the sculptor and the marble had totally coalesced, so deeply penetrating and infusing each other that they had become one, marble and man in organic unity, each fulfilling the other in the greatest act of art and love unknown to the human species. After May Day, he completed the drawing of his virile Saint Proculus, who had been martyred before the gates of Bologna in 303, while, in the full flower of his youth and strength, he clothed him in a belted tunic which did nothing to conceal the vigorous torso and hips and bare legs. It was anatomically true and convincing. As he made his clay model, his experience with the Hercules bone bore fruit, for he was able to achieve the corded, dividing thighs, the bulging stamina-packed calves, truly the torso and legs of a heroic warrior and deliverer, powerful, indestructible. Then, quite unabashedly, he modeled his own portrait from a mirror of his bedroom. The punched-in bridge of the nose, the flat spread of the cheekbones and wide spread of the eyes, the thatch of hair worn halfway down his forehead, the steadfast gaze resolved to triumph against the enemies of Bologna, the enemies of art, of life. Was it not all the same? Carving in marble, Feeling the blow of his chisel, Vincenzo was blotted out, the orange earth figure and the heavy sound of his voice. With his eyes slitted against the flying chips with the emergence of form from the block, he again felt himself to be 15 feet tall. Vincenzo began to shrink in size, then fade, until finally he stopped coming to the courtyard. When the early afternoon sun made it too hot to work in the enclosed courtyard, he took crayon and paper to the front of the church, sat on the cool stone before Della Quercia's carvings, and each day he refreshed himself by copying a different figure. God, Noah, Adam, Eve, trying to capture some part of Della Quercia's power of imparting emotion, drama, conflict, and reality through his half-released Istrian stone figures. The hot summer months passed in fulfillment. Up before first light, working the marble by day, carving for 6 hours before he ate from his basket cold sliced salame and bread. At night, when the light had begun to hide the planes and surfaces of the figure, he would drape it in moist cloth, put it in back in his head, lock the door securely behind him, walk to the wide, shallow Reno River for a cool soak and swim, then to the Aldovrandes, watching the stars be born in the deep blue canopy of the Emilian Plain. Vincenzo had disappeared, and so had Clarissa. He leaned from a passing remark of Aldovrandes that Marco had taken her to the hunting lodge in the Apennines for the hot summer months. The Aldovrandes family too departed for their summer villa in the mountains. For most of July and all of August, Bologna was shut down as though decimated by the plague. Its shops locked behind iron, rolled-down shutters. He stayed alone in the palace with a pair of servants who considered themselves too old to travel, and saw his host only when Aldovrandes rode in for a day to take care of his affairs, his face tanned by the mountain sun. Once he brought startling news from Florence. His short, quizzical eyebrows pointed almost vertically as he exclaimed, "Your Fra Savonarola, he has come out into the open. He has declared war on the Pope." "You mean the way Lorenzo did when Rome excommunicated Florence?" "Ah, no, this is personal and punitive." Aldovrandes read from a report of Savonarola's latest Duomo sermon. "When you see a head which is healthy, you can say that the body is healthy also. But when the head is bad, look out for the body. And so when the head of the administration happens to be ambitious, lustful, and in other ways vicious, be sure that the scourge is near. When you see, therefore, that God allows the head of the church to wallow in crime and simony, then I say that the scourge of the people approaches." Michelangelo was not as shocked as Aldovrandes expected, for Prio Biscellini had predicted long ago that the Pope was Savonarola's ultimate target. How has the Pope replied? He summoned the Savonarola to Rome to explain his divine revelations. But Savonarola has declined, declaring, "All good and wise citizens judge that my departure from this place would be to the great detriment of the people, yet of little use to you in Rome. Because of the furtherance of this work, I am quite sure these difficulties in the way of my going spring from God's will. Therefore it is not the will of God that I should leave this place at present." Aldovrandes chuckled. "An infallible system, don't you think?" Michelangelo, too, declined to leave this place when Aldovrandes suggested he spend a cool holiday in the mountains with him. "Thank you, but I'm moving along rapidly with the St. Proculus. At this rate, I shall finish by fall." The summer was over. Bologna rolled up its shutters and became a living city. Fall set in, and the St. Proculus was finished. Michelangelo and Aldovrandes stood before the figure. Michelangelo ran his hand carelessly over the high polish. He was exhausted, but happy with it. So was Aldovrandes. "I will ask the fathers to set an unveiling date, but perhaps during the Christmas holidays." Michelangelo was silent. "It was the sculptor's job to carve and the patron's to unveil. We could honor you in San Domenico." "My work is done, and I have grown homesick for Florence," said Michelangelo quietly. "You have been a good friend." Aldovrandes smiled. "For a year of bed and board, I have extracted from you countless hours of reading poetry and an illustrated copy of the Divine Comedy. What? Aldovrandes ever drove a shrewder bargain." He could not go without saying goodbye to Clarissa. That took a little waiting. Finally, Aldovrandes invited him to a party at a secluded villa in the hills, where the wealthy young Bolognese felt free to bring their mistresses for feasting and dancing. Michelangelo saw that there would be no chance for even a moment of privacy in a quiet library or music room. They would have to say goodbye in the middle of a drawing room, surrounded by 20 couples. And on their faces, they would have to wear the bantering Bolognese smile, which meant that charming pleasantries were being exchanged. I have waited to say goodbye, Clarissa. I am going back to Florence. Her eyebrows came together for a moment, but the fixed smile never wavered. I'm sorry. It has been pleasant to know you were here. Pleasant? A torture. Pleasant. In a way. When will you return? I don't know. Perhaps never. Everyone returns to Bologna. It's on the road to everywhere. Then I'll be back.